I read feminist books, but because I watched the world. And I noticed early on in my life that the world did not give to women the same dignity that it gave to men. I noticed how much the socialization of girls was focused on men. Learn to cook and clean so you can keep a man. Be ambitious, but not too ambitious so you don't intimidate a man. Learn to pretend so as to protect a man's ego. Don't wear a miniskirt or you'll be raped by a man. I noticed how this was not the case for boys. Boys also had difficult expectations placed on them to make money, to be providers. But their socialization was not focused on women. They did not have to alter their behavior in order to please women. And as a child, I asked many questions. Why do we raise girls to aspire to marriage, but we don't raise boys to aspire to marriage? And yet, those girls are supposed to marry those boys. How will the marriage be happy and equal if one half has from birth been groomed to be a perfect wife, while the other half has not been groomed to be a perfect husband? One day, I heard some people talking about a female professor in the university town where I grew up. They said she was arrogant. And I thought about another professor, a man, who behaved exactly like a woman, but he wasn't called arrogant. He was called confident, and everyone said he was a good leader. That made me realize that the same behavior was judged differently depending on whether it came from a man or from a woman. A man is confident, a woman is arrogant. A man is assertive, a woman is aggressive. A man is strategic, a woman is manipulative. A man is a leader, a woman is controlling. A man is authoritative, a woman is annoying or nagging. The behavior is the same, but we judge it differently. I realized that when people criticized a woman for being aggressive or arrogant, but did not criticize a man for the same things, it was not arrogance or aggression that they disliked, it was actually women that they disliked. And that was when I came to understand misogyny. I define misogyny as the refusal or the inability to see women as full human beings. And misogyny is such an ingrained part of cultures all over the world that both men and women can be misogynistic without even seeing it. Because you're born a girl, something you have no control over, you're always defined in relation to a man, somebody's daughter, somebody's wife. You're not defined on your own merits. You cannot inherit property. You cannot drive a car. You cannot go to school. You cannot be paid equally for equal work. You cannot assume that you're safe just walking down the street. These are just some examples of misogyny, so common that people are blind to them. Misogyny can sometimes sound like praise, such as when people say that women are special, that women are morally better than men. The danger of this thinking is that if women are seen as morally better than men, then it justifies their being held to a higher and more unfair standard. For example, studies show that American voters expect virtuous behavior from female political candidates. Male candidates can get away with a lot, but women are judged very harshly for the smallest transgression. I remember a female Nigerian politician who some years ago was accused of stealing money. People were horrified, and the abuse she got was vicious. How can she do that? She's a woman, people said. But the woman was a politician and had done what other politicians do. And she should have been criticized, but in the same degree as her fellow male politicians. The truth is that women are not special. Women are human. Women are just as human as men. Women are as capable of goodness and of evil, just as men are. I remember watching television recently with a friend, and a woman who had been sexually assaulted was being interviewed. And my friend said, she's so rude to the interviewer. And I was struck by this. A woman had suffered from a horrific crime, a horrific violation, and yet the focus was whether she was rude to the interviewer. So clearly, this woman was expected to be angry, but angry in an acceptable and a nice way. Sometimes women are expected to be almost perfect before they are worthy of sympathy. But women should be allowed to be difficult and imperfect and complicated and still be deserving of justice and sympathy. I remember a woman when I was growing up whose husband got somebody else pregnant. And I remember how everyone blamed her, the wife, and said she had driven him out because she was too ambitious about her career. The marriage ended and she was not allowed to take any of the property they owned together. His family even insisted she would not leave with the children. I remember thinking that this was so wrong, such a clear injustice. And injustice leads to resentment, and resentment leads to unhappiness. There can never truly be happiness in a society where there is there can never truly be happiness in a society where there is resentment. One day during my teenage years, I was arguing with a friend, and he called me a feminist. I had no idea what feminist meant, but later I looked it up in the dictionary, and I said, yes, I am, and you should be too. It sounds naive now, but when I first started speaking about feminism, I didn't understand why there was so much hostility and resistance, mostly from men, but also from some women. Some people told me, you must hate men. As somebody who adores her father and is an absolute daddy's girl, I cannot possibly hate men. I love men, I love women, I love people. But pointing out the injustices women suffer because they are women, and pointing out the privileges that men have because they are men, is not the same thing as hating men. Some people told me, sexual assault is not that serious. Sexual assault is a horrific violation and an evil crime with lasting consequences. Yet it is often not taken seriously enough. I cannot imagine any other crime where the victim is so often blamed. If somebody breaks into your house and robs you, nobody asks you, why do you own a house? They blame the robber. But with sexual violence, I noticed how often people try to minimize or justify it. Some people told me, why not call yourself a humanist or a universalist? Why say feminist? Well, because we need to name a problem in order to solve a problem. The labor movement was about fair labor laws and called itself the labor movement. If, as a man, you go to the doctor with prostate problems, you expect the doctor to give you medicine for the prostate, not for all parts of your body, even though by taking the medicine, the whole body benefits. It is women who have historically been oppressed, and that is where the focus should be. Some people told me the equality of women is not our culture. 100 years ago, Korean girls were married off at 10 years old. That was culture. Korean widows were banned from remarrying. That was culture. But now it is no longer culture. And so if the equality of women is truly not Korean culture, then Korean people can make it Korean culture. People make culture. Culture does not make people. And what is the point of culture? Culture exists to make sure a society survives and thrives. And so if there's anything that prevents a part of that society from thriving, that thing needs to change. Some people told me, do you want to be a man? Why do you pretend there's no difference between men and women? Of course, men and women are different. It is exactly those differences that are used as a basis to justify women's oppression. Women do not want to be men. Women are not saying that they are the same as men. Women are saying they want to be equal to men. They are equal to men. During the American Civil Rights Movement, a black person was once asked, so you want to be white? Is that what this is about? And this black person said, no, black people are very happy being black. They just want the same rights as their fellow white citizens. Today, whenever I hear about a woman being the first to do or be something in the world, I celebrate it, but I also feel a kind of sadness. How many women might have been there before her if being born with a vagina had not prevented them from reaching their potential? And I think of people like my grandmother, Regina Kotigwe, who was witty and brilliant, but uneducated, because in her time, only boys went to school, and it was considered a waste to educate girls because they would merely end up as wives. And I sometimes wonder what my grandmother could have been, who she might have been, had she been given the chance of an education. Later, I started to see that even though men as a group had power over women, gender expectations were also bad for men. We don't allow men to be afraid. We don't allow men to show vulnerability. We don't give men the language to talk about emotion. And so starting very early, when we say to toddlers that boys don't cry, we teach boys a fragility that they mistake for strength. Boys are raised to think that they should dominate women, but the need to dominate comes from a weakness, not a strength. As Toni Morrison said, if you need somebody to be on their knees in order for you to stand tall, then you have a big problem. Men are too often burdened with the task of being providers, but if men support policies that enable women to earn equal pay, then in a generation, perhaps men will no longer have that burden. We also do boys a disservice when we excuse bad behavior by saying that boys will be boys. Because when we say that, we're really saying that men are animals that cannot control themselves, and that it is intrinsically in the nature of men to be violent. I don't believe this. But if it is indeed true, then we should not trust men to hold any position of power in the world, because uncontrolled animals cannot be trusted with power. We teach women to protect themselves from rape, but do we teach men not to rape? If we spend as much time on teaching men not to rape as we do telling women to protect themselves, then maybe rapes will decrease. Because rape is about power. Otherwise, a rapist would find a consenting adult to have sex with. You cannot assault your equal. And so sexual assault shows us that men do not truly think of women as their equals. We should change laws that diminish women, but changing mindsets is even more important. We should enact policies that support women, but changing cultural attitudes is even more important. It is not enough to pass laws against sexual violence. We should also ask, how are boys learning about sex? What are boys learning about sex? Have boys been taught that women are not objects, that women have their own desires, that women do not exist for the benefit of men? And what are girls learning about sex? How are they learning about sex? A democracy is not a real democracy if all of its citizens do not have equal rights. And if a large number of citizens, such as women in Korea, live in fear that their privacy will be violated when they check into a hotel or when they use a public toilet, then the democracy is flawed. A society with double standards is an unjust society. Men are expected to be sexual and to boast about sex. And women are expected to be sexy but not sexual. There's too much shame attached to women's sexuality. To post videos of women having sex, or to call a woman a slut, which is the person who's sexually promiscuous, is a way of deeply shaming her. But there is no male equivalent for slut. And so slut is not really a criticism of promiscuous behavior. It is a criticism of women being sexual beings. Because if as a society we want to judge promiscuity, then we should judge it the same for both men and women. I'm a feminist because I want to live in a just world, because I believe that we're better off as people if everyone around us is better off. In a feminist world, we would loosen the rigidity of what is expected for men and women. Because if you are to be judged in a feminist world, you would be judged on whether you succeed or fail at what you want to do, rather than at what you're supposed to do. Women's rights will not solve all of the world's problems, but we cannot solve all of the world's problems without solving the problem of women's inequality. Thank you.